ask Ed to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Cole, so much. Thanks to everyone who is on this call this evening. Thank you for all of your activism. Thank you for rising up to be the voices that are needed to be heard in the Donald Trump era. We are at a turning point. It's 1968, it's 1932, it's 1860. That is where we are, at one of these turning points in American history. And we thank you so much for everything that you are doing as activists. And that film that Cole just ran, well, that's 1982. I had introduced the nuclear freeze resolution just 4 months before in early March of 1982. I did so on a bipartisan basis, and within 4 months, 1 million people showed up in Central Park to protest the nuclear arms race and to all be shouting, "Freeze now." It is still the largest single demonstration in American history. And it came from the nuclear disarmament community because Ronald Reagan had walked away from negotiations, walked away from talking to the Soviet Union, wanted to build the Trident, the Cruise, the Pershing, all of these gold-plated weapons that had been on the blueprints of the Pentagon for a generation. And so Randall Forsberg, this brilliant woman, MIT, Harvard trained, but a woman, so she was kind of shunned by the all-male arms control priesthood in America. So she and we partnered on that issue, introduced the nuclear freeze, and changed the whole debate, and ultimately drove Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan to the negotiating table. And part of it was ultimately my amendment passed on the floor of the House of Representatives to ban underground nuclear testing. They were losing the votes. We had built a national movement to be able to confront the military-industrial complex. So we can do it again. And in a way, history is repeating itself because I introduced the Green New Deal with another unbelievably talented young woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we did that just a year and a half ago. And it has changed the debate in our country and across the planet on the climate crisis. Because once again, people are rising up. Young people are joining climate activists, veterans, and putting together a movement which is powerful and has changed the political dynamic of our country, and ultimately has every one of the presidential candidates, every candidate everywhere now saying, well, I have my own Green New Deal. Well, that wasn't on the scoreboard before Alexandria and I introduced the Green New Deal, any more than a newfound interest in nuclear arms control existed before I introduced the nuclear freeze with Randall Forsberg. And what was the difference in each case? It's people rising up and demanding change. And what's heartening right now is that all across our country, we are seeing people rising up. They are looking at the murder of George Floyd. They're seeing the racial injustice that's built into our society. And they're demanding that changes be made. They're seeing with coronavirus the impacts on Black and brown and immigrant communities in disproportionate ways. And they're saying something must happen. We have to be better. We have to improve. And to a very large extent, we need more money. We need more funding. And where should that funding come from? The defense budget should come from other programs, that don't provide the level of protection for American families, which the healthcare and the education and other programs which they need would be providing. So that's really what this is all about. And in a way, the Green New Deal talks about all of these issues, talks about the need to rebalance our society, to see the minority communities, the frontline communities, to work with intersectionality to make sure that everyone is included, everyone is protected. And that's been my goal throughout my career. And I definitely see a connective tissue between the nuclear freeze and the Green New Deal, but also all the other work that I'm doing right now on nuclear arms control in North Korea, on nuclear testing, on cutting the budget for the nuclear weapons program inside of the Pentagon. All of it is connected. And all of it is connected in saying we have to take care of those people in our society who need the protections of our government. And it won't come from the fossil fuel industry, and it won't come from the nuclear arms industry. It will have to come from a reprioritization of the programs that we have inside of our country. So I can just stop right there, Cole, if you'd like, and then move on to whatever questions people might have. But again, I just want to thank everybody for joining and for all of the wonderful words of encouragement which you've been giving me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. We do have a few questions prepared, and we're going to call on different members of Mass Peace Action to ask each question. First up is going to be Reverend Vernon K. Walker. He is Policy Director of the Young Democrats of Mass. He is a minister with the Pentecostal Tabernacle of Cambridge, and he's a board member of Mass Peace Action. Vernon.
Good evening, Senator. So good to be back in conversation with you at yet another town hall.
Good to see you again, Reverend.
Yes, good to see you, and thank you so much for your remarkable work down through the years. Well, I'd like to ask a question related to police violence, because as we know, we are living in a pivotal moment where unfortunately Black and brown bodies have recently and historically have suffered at the hands of racism manifest in the form of police brutality. So with that in mind, I would like to ask this question, make this statement and then ask a question. People throughout the country are calling for an end to militarized policing, ending the 1033 program, ending qualified immunities, transferring funding from police to social services, and preventing deployment of the military on U.S. soil. And I'd like to know, and some of the folks on this call would like to know, and some of the folks watching on Facebook would like to know, Senator, where do you stand on these issues?
Well, thank you, Reverend. And, I oppose the 1033 program, the one that provides for the militarization of our law enforcement agencies on the local level. We should not be transferring weapons of war to local police. We just should not be doing it. And Bernie Sanders and I believe that, and we introduced legislation last week to ban tear gas, to ban rubber bullets from being used. We have to go beyond even the restrictions on the sale of military equipment. We have to be more specific, more intentional in terms of what we're talking about. So Bernie and I did that last week. And to take it a step further, Reverend, I think we also have to make sure that we ban qualified immunity. Bernie and Kamala Harris and I, we introduced legislation just 2 weeks ago that would ban qualified immunity. That's a program by which police officers who murder innocent people, who injure innocent people, that they absolutely cannot be immune from lawsuits by the families of those who they have harmed. And so we are going to be fighting on that front, Bernie and Kamala and I, to continue to raise the profile of this fundamental injustice where the family of George Floyd cannot sue that police officer. That is absolutely wrong, and we're going to work hard to pass the legislation to make sure that we overturn this judicially created doctrine that actually reduces the incentive for police officers to act in a way that is consistent with the law. So thank you, Reverend Vernon, for that question.
Great, thank you, Senator. Next up is Savina Martin. She is co-chair of the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign and also a board member of Masterpiece Action. Savina. You working on your sound? I have to do it? Really?
Thank you, Cole.
I don't know if I can do it.
You had me muted. It said I could not unmute myself. Good evening, Senator Markey. How are you?
Good evening, Savina.
Thank you for being here. There are 140 million poor and low income people in this country. Workers, tenants, healthcare workers, immigrants, and prisoners are flat on their back due to the public health and economic consequences of this COVID crisis. How do we get to a $15 minimum wage, universal basic income, adequate housing for all, and guaranteed jobs as proposed by the Poor People's Campaign's new Moral Justice Jubilee policy platform? We unveiled it last week at our event.
Yeah,
Like
fabulous. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you for helping to lift our gaze to the constellation of opportunities and responsibilities which we have. So the coronavirus has laid bare the structural racial inequities in our society. We can see that disproportionately it's Black and brown and immigrant families who are most affected by the coronavirus. In many instances, they cannot Zoom to their job. They have to show up at the grocery store. They have to show up in the sanitation department. They're more exposed. And by being more exposed themselves, that means that their families at home are more exposed as well. So we have an obligation to them as we work our way through the coronavirus to make sure they get the help which they need. So I would begin by saying that we need to pass the HEROES Act. We have to make sure that we get more funding that's going back to the cities and towns. We have to make sure that we get more funding for the hospitals and medical workers. We have to extend the unemployment program. It runs out at the end of July. We have to make sure that people get the extra $600 a week that the federal government has been providing, because August is not going to be a good month. We can already see that Donald Trump and his racist policies, his political incompetence is actually leading to an increase in the coronavirus pandemic, not a reduction. So Bernie and I and Kamala, we introduced legislation to give each person in the country, each person, $2,000 a month. So for a couple, that would be $4,000 a month. If they have a child, $6,000 a month. And for that program to last throughout the pandemic and 3 months beyond, so that the help, the assistance is there for those families, that they are able to get the help which they need. We have to extend the unemployment program, as I said. It just has to keep going until the crisis is over. We're heading into the greatest economic catastrophe since the Great Depression. I know the impact that it had on my family, on my mother and father. My father from the first floor of a triple-decker up in Lawrence, 1930s, the Great Depression, not good for the Markey family in Lawrence. The same thing for my mother here in Malden. I'm in Malden. I live in the same house that I grew up in. And this is the dining room where my father honored my mother because she had Alzheimer's. And my father would say, your mother was a brilliant woman. We have to try to keep her here in the home, Eddie, which my father did at age 80, 82, 84, 86, 88, 90, right here, right in the space that I'm in right now in our dining room. And which is why I stayed here in Malden, why I stayed here in this house, to be here with my father, to help my father. Families all across this country right now, they're looking at the bills at the kitchen table the same way my mother and father did when I was growing up. My father drove a truck for the Hood Milk Company. And these families are all heroes, but heroes need help. And that's why we need the Heroes Act. That's why we need the program that Kamala and Bernie and I have introduced, and we're going to be battling for it. Now, up until now, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have been saying, well, don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. We can't afford to help any more people in America. But you know what's happening? The red states are now suffering what we were suffering 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. So my belief is that these red state governors are going to change their tune and realize that we have to provide the help for these families. And included in this is a national $15 an hour minimum wage. We absolutely have to do it. We have to guarantee that we help these families to get what they need. I'm part of the effort here in Massachusetts a few years ago to raise our minimum wage, but we need a national program to do it. Elizabeth Warren and I have introduced legislation for 500,000 new units that would be created across our country. It's a $500 billion program. It would create upwards of 500,000 to 3.2 million new affordable housing units, public housing units. We have to think big in this pandemic. We have to provide the housing. We have to provide the education. We have to provide the healthcare. We can see that there is a justice deficit in our educational, healthcare, housing, educational programs across our entire economy. And we need to respond to it. So that's what I am doing right now. And I will continue to fight on the floor of the United States Senate for these programs. We're going to have an epic battle in July with Mitch McConnell, the biggest epic battle of my entire political career is going to take place in the end of July. And it's going to be over whether or not we provide the funding, the programs for these families who are going to be absolutely desperate. And I'll say one other thing in conclusion, which is that I saw the need to increase the amount of funding for minority businesses who are being left behind, and I fought to increase that funding. I saw that even in Massachusetts, 255,000 people were categorized as gig workers, independent contractors. Yeah, they drive a truck, they drive an Uber. 255,000 people. So I worked to create a program so that those 255,000 people just in Massachusetts qualified for the $600 a week unemployment program. Again, all that expires on July 31st. So that's why the final 2 weeks of July are going to be the epic struggle of my career. And thank you for that question, because it goes right to the heart of what we're in right now. And I said it earlier, we're back to the Great Depression. We're back to this moment where either we respond or the suffering for tens of millions of families is just going to become absolutely historically unacceptable. Thank you, Sabina.
Thank you. Thank you. We have several more questions to get through. Next up is Nick Rabb on the Green New Deal. He is a PhD student at Tufts in cognitive science. He works with Sunrise Boston and also with MAPA's Peace and Climate Working Group. Nick.
Thanks, Cole. Hi, Senator Markey. It's great to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a while. Haven't seen you since the big town hall last year in Dorchester, so it's great to see you here as well.
Thank you.
Senator Markey, I wanted to know, your partnership with Representative Ocasio-Cortez on the Green New Deal has excited the world and given so much hope to people of all ages. especially young people who are just incredibly concerned about the climate crisis and its impact on our future. Can you explain for everybody the key points of the Green New Deal, why it's so important that we have to carry it out, and also how it intersects with this moment of uprising for the movement for Black lives?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick, for that great question. Yeah, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected in November of 2018. And so I called her to congratulate her. And I asked her to have lunch with me. So in the first week of December of 2018, we sat down for 2.5 hours in the senatorial dining room. And everyone who was there, the senators and others, it was 12 o'clock, 12:30, 1:30, 2 o'clock. It's empty, except for Alexandria and myself. 2:15, 2:30, we're still sitting there talking about a Green New Deal, what it would look like and how we can introduce it into the House and the Senate and change the whole discussion about the climate crisis. And so we began to then work on it. So in the first week of February of 2019, we introduced the Green New Deal. And nothing has been the same since then, any more than nothing was the same after I introduced the nuclear freeze, because it unleashed this national and international response. And what Alexandria and I tried to do with it was to lay out the simple principles. Number one, the planet's running a fever. All 13 federal agencies agree, even in the Trump administration. The UN scientists all agree. There are no emergency rooms for planets, so we have to engage in preventative care. And that means unleashing wind, solar, all electric vehicles, storage battery technologies, and energy conservation, energy efficiency strategies for our industrial, commercial, agricultural sectors, just across the whole board. Well, then Trump and Fox News, they just started attacking it as socialism. And what do we say? We say, well, tax breaks for 100 years for the oil, gas, and coal industry, that looks a lot like socialism. So give us some of that socialism for wind and solar and all electric vehicles and storage battery technologies, and we will bury the fossil fuel industry. So now we added in a third component. And the third component, and thank you for asking the question, Nick, it's that we have to do this with intersectionality. We have to do it with frontline communities at the front of the line. We have to actually say that poorer communities, that minority communities have already and historically suffered from their excessive exposure to pollution in our society. The higher rates of asthma in Chelsea or Worcester in the minority communities make them more vulnerable to the coronavirus. We know that. So our job is to make sure that we do a Green New Deal, but do so in a way in which we create millions of new jobs, but we also make sure that minority communities, frontline communities are included. And you know, out on the streets of this country, that's what we're hearing. We're hearing from people who are saying it's structurally built into our economic system, this racism. So the Green New Deal was really a call for a structural change. And I think that's why so many young people have rallied around it, why so many in the minority community have rallied around it, because it's a game-changing approach to thinking about our economy. Making sure, yeah, we create union jobs, yes, that is prevailing wage, but that we do so in a way that ensures that those communities, minority communities, historically left behind, are brought in, that it's an intentional goal to make sure that we do it right. You know, when you think of the first New Deal, they wrote it because of the Southern conservative senators so that sharecroppers would not qualify for Social Security. Well, who were the sharecroppers? Well, of course, they were the Black of descendants of the slaves. So we love the New Deal, but we also stipulate that there were many racial inequities that were built into it. So we made this statement that that the Green New Deal would rectify that. And as we built our new infrastructure in America, we would do so, not just creating jobs, but creating justice as well. And not just environmental justice, but economic justice as well. And so I thank you for that question, Nick, because in a lot of ways, the Green New Deal is the forerunner to what we're hearing out on the streets of our country right now. Let's end this structural racism, which is built into our society.
Amen. Thank you, Senator. Next up is Elaine Scarry. She is professor of English at Harvard. She's author of the book Thermonuclear Monarchy, Choosing Between Democracy and Doom, and she's a member of MAPA's Nuclear Disarmament Working Group. Elaine.
Thanks, Cole. Senator Markey, almost no one has done as much as you've done to help the cause of nuclear disarmament. And that's why I and many, many other people at Mass Peace Action feel that it's desperately necessary that you be reelected. Now more than ever, your work is needed. The United States has reserved the right to use nuclear weapons first, a doctrine which places the whole world on edge. Congress is funding a new nuclear weapons buildup and participating in the hostility and arms races with Russia and China. President Trump is canceling arms control treaties and threatening to renew atmospheric testing. How do we get Congress to cut nuclear weapons spending and build momentum for disarmament, exemplified by your SANE, HALT, and no first use bills?
Thank you, Elaine, and I love being over at your conference over at Harvard a couple of years ago, and allowing me to speak at it. Thank you so much. And I actually keep your book right on my desk, by the way. So it's just a seminal analysis of the pathology that nuclear weapons has built into our society and into our world. So yes, the SANE Act is something that I've been introducing year after year so that we can talk about the need for us to cut $75 billion out of our nuclear weapons program, unneeded, a waste. We should be negotiating with other countries, not building the incentives for them to be accelerating their nuclear arms programs as well. It makes absolutely no sense. It just makes the world less safe rather than more safe. I introduced a couple of weeks ago the PAUSE Act. The PAUSE Act actually would just ban any further underground nuclear testing in the United States. The president and his advisors are now talking about allowing for a resumption of underground nuclear testing and or even atmospheric nuclear testing, because it's the Donald Trump administration. Who knows what lurks in this man's mind? So since 1986, when my amendment passed on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, banning underground nuclear testing as long as the Soviets did not test underground, that was the beginning of the end of that whole regime. And now Donald Trump, like every other bad idea that he's embraced, is seeking to, recommence that kind of an arms race, which is absolutely insane. So I introduced the PAUSE Act in order to deal with that issue. In the same way that I introduced my no first use legislation. No first use, saying to the president, you do not have the right to start a nuclear war against another country, North Korea or anyone else, if we have not been attacked by nuclear weapons. You do not have the right unless you get affirmative permission from the United States House and the United States Senate. That's my no first use bill, which actually led to, unbelievably, the first hearing on this subject of first use in a generation in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, just driving this discussion. And you could look over at the other senators as they were hearing this discussion about how a president without a real conversation with anyone, we'd be able to launch our nuclear weapons, which would lead to ultimately an apocalyptic moment on this planet, from which we would not recover, perhaps forever. So that's my goal. My goal is to make sure that we don't allow Trump to even pull out of existing treaties. That's why I introduced the Pause Act, saying he can't withdraw from these treaties without getting the permission of the House and the Senate. The man is a menace. Yes, he's a racist, but he's also not a person that we want to have a finger on the nuclear weapon. The clock is getting closer and closer to midnight. The hands are getting closer and closer. So from my perspective, this whole Trump era has to end. It has to be a footnote in history. It has to be something that's just viewed as aberrational. And our agenda has to be the one that is put in place so that we take unnecessary military expenditures, nuclear expenditures, and we move them over to the healthcare, to the education of the people in our country. That's what people out on the streets of our country are calling for. They're standing up and they're demanding it. And that's what all these bills are that I've introduced so that we can have this debate in our country. And it's why, when I get reelected, why, when Joe Biden is sworn in as president, why, when we're in the majority in the Senate, these are the hearings we'll be having immediately to make sure we have these discussions. So, Elaine, thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you, Senator. Well, we probably just have time for one more question. I'm going to call on Jeff Klein. He is a board member of Mass Peace Action, active in our Palestine-Israel Working Group. He is a retired union president and also a member of Dorchester People for Peace. Jeff.
Markey, I was there at the rally in Central Park that you spoke at, along with 2 busloads of members of my union from GE and Lynn.
Wow.
You remember it well. I want to ask you about Israel's plans for annexation of occupied territory. As you know, Congress is considering a $38 billion aid package to Israel at the same time that the stated intention of its government is to annex large parts of the West Bank starting July 1st. Formal annexation would culminate decades of illegal settlement building and land seizures in the occupied territories, acts which contradict international law and long-held U.S. policies. Experience shows that reproaching Israel without real consequences has no effect. Large majorities of Democratic voters support reducing U.S. military aid to Israel. As an economically and technologically advanced country, why can't Israel pay for its own defense? Why should Congress provide additional billions in military aid from U.S. taxpayers to subsidize Israel's illegal activities? And if Israel does move ahead with annexation of any kind, how do you propose to hold it accountable for its actions?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, obviously, everyone on this call knows that the only solution to that conflict is a 2-state solution, 2 states. And that's the only way in which ultimately it can be resolved. And ultimately, I have, without question, tried to say clearly to Israel that it's important, that they not engage in a unilateral annexation. And that's why I'm a co-sponsor of Senate Resolution 234, which is a resolution affirming the United States commitment to a 2-state solution, and that unilateral annexation would harm the prospects for peace, which is why I joined with Senators Chris Murphy, Chris Van Hollen, Tim Kaine, on a letter to restate my longstanding support for the two-state solution, and to urge the Israelis not to unilaterally annex parts of the West Bank, for fear it will make a two-state solution that much harder to achieve. As of now, the Israeli government has not taken that step to unilaterally annex parts of the West Bank. And I can only remain hopeful that our advocacy, combined with the advocacy coming from many other corners of the world, will lead to an outcome which is one in which the Israelis decide not to move forward unilaterally. So that is what I will be doing. That is what my hope is. And I think ultimately that is the way in which we can advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. So thank you for that question, Jeff. And thank you, Cole, for having me on this evening.
Thank you, Senator. And so I think we have a hard stop at 7 because the Senator has to speak at another event. So now I'd like to go to Rory, if he is here, for our call to action. And also Jonathan King, if you would like to get on as well.
Folks, my name is Rory Clark, and it is my joy and privilege to be the Senator's statewide organizing director here on the campaign and get to work with 20 fabulous organizers across the state and the thousands upon thousands of volunteers that we've got in just about every corner of the state. So first of all, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for engaging in this discussion with us. And thank you for stepping up and taking a part of this campaign and making it yours. We really tremendously appreciate every single one of you. So our field campaign, our organizing work, is built on sort of two main pillars. We've got relational organizing, and we're also doing some really incredible work at the precinct level. So I'll tell you about the relational organizing first. We have, seen time and time again through many campaigns. I'm sure you guys have seen this on campaigns that you've volunteered on and worked on before, that we know that the most effective person to speak to a voter, to turn them out to vote, to explain why this election is so important, why this campaign is essential in reelecting and sending our fabulous Senator Ed back to the Senate. You know that the most effective person to do that is somebody who knows that voter. So when we look at we look at the people who are, used to voting, regularly vote, those super voters, those folks like a lot of you who never miss an election because they love voting. We all know other folks. We all know somebody who maybe isn't quite as super of a voter, maybe missed an election once or twice, but knows you, loves you, and respects your political opinions, and is going to really respect it and think about it when you tell them why it matters so much to every single one of us here on this Zoom that we reelect Ed Markey as United States Senator for Massachusetts. So Cole and the whole MAPPA team has made a fabulous page. We have this really cool tool called support.edmarkey.com. And it is a fabulous way to relationally organize. And I gotta say, I've never seen a tool like this. I've never seen something like this before. It is so easy and it is so effective. And it's something that we actually created in-house here on the campaign. It was put together by volunteers. And so we're really proud of it and really excited that that Mass Peace Action is joining us in deploying this tool. So first, foremost, the easiest thing that you can do, just like we've got up on the screen right now, is to go to support.edmarkey.com/masspeaceaction, and you'll come to this fabulous page. We've got a photo with with Ed and some Mass Peace Actions volunteers over at one of our press conferences. And you've got a little title up here. It tells you that it's Mass Peace Action, it's sticking with Ed, and a nice little description about why MAPA, why Mass Peace Action is in this fight with Ed. So folks will just fill out their basic contact info, their name, their zip code, and then they'll go to a second page that'll ask them if they're planning on supporting Ed Markey on September 1st. Obviously, they will say definitely. Yes, they're strongly supporting Ed. And as you can see in the poll that's popping up on your screen here, you can click yes, strongly supporting Ed. And you can also, on your supporter page, it will also, thank you for throwing that in the chat, Cole. When you go to the Mass Peace Action supporter page, it'll also ask if you're interested in volunteering. So you can tell us yes, maybe, later, no. Obviously, we hope you'll all volunteer, but definitely want to make sure that folks fill out the Mass Peace Action supporter page, because it's a great way for us to identify supporters and identify all the many, many folks that we'll need to ID and have these conversations with across the state. And once you fill out the Mass Peace Action supporter page, not only will we know that you're one of the many Mass Peace Action members who is sticking with Ed, but you'll also get prompted to make your own page. It's super easy. You just type in your name. You can get to choose a picture, whether it's my personal favorite, Ed in his dad's big green winter coat at a union rally, or one in which he's wearing his mask and his fancy Air Revolution sneakers, or one of any number of photos. You can choose a photo, and then you can write your own little description about why it is that you're sticking with Ed, why this is personal to you. And what we want to ask you to do is to take that page, whether you're sharing your Mass Peace Action page with your friends and family, or making your own, but to email that. You can post it on Facebook or Twitter. John Walsh, our campaign manager, he likes to text 4 or 5 people his link and ask them to fill it out every night before he goes to bed. So there are all different kinds of ways that you can do this, but every single way is fabulous, because we know that, the most effective way to persuade somebody to vote and to persuade them to vote for Ed is to have somebody who they know, who they trust, talk to them about why this is personal, about why it really means something to you to re-elect Ed Markey here in Massachusetts. So that's first and foremost. Fill out the MAPA supporter page. You can create your own and share it. For those of you who might have a couple hours to keep helping us out, you can sign up to join us at a phone bank. We're doing a lot of Zoom phone banks. We've got teams all across the state, different local teams who we can connect you with. You can find ways to volunteer at edmarkey.com/volunteer. And I will just throw that into the chat. You can also find a list of our events at edmarkey.com/events. Those are both ways that you can get involved and sign up for a phone bank. Our organizers and our community captains across the state, whichever one's local to you, whichever one works for the right time for you, they'll teach you how to make calls. They'll teach you how to make calls, whether you can choose your preference. If you want to make calls to some of your friends and family and talk to them about Ed, we would love that. If you want to call voters who are local to you in your town or even in your precinct, we'll teach you how to do that. So we would love it if you've got 2 hours on a Monday night, a Sunday afternoon, Thursday evening, whenever you've got a couple hours, probably an Ed Markey phone bank somewhere that we can get you connected to, and we would just love to have you join us making some calls. We've got a lot of voters in Massachusetts, a lot of folks we need to call. So that's our
just a comment, Rory, is that a lot of us are veterans of many campaigns, and we are used
Mm-hmm.
to door knocking and rallies.
Mm-hmm.
Your door knocking and rallies will not be the main way that campaigns conduct themselves. So we have to do as much online as possible. And that's why we're using the supporter page and asking everybody to go and fill that in. You may have been
Absolutely.
campaigning online, but this is it in the age of social distancing.
Mm-hmm. And we're really I'm tremendously proud of the way this campaign has adapted and met the moment. I think it goes straight to Ed, who really when this first well when things started shutting down, he put out this really beautiful post on Medium, which I would really encourage everybody to read if you haven't yet, about how it's our connections that are going to get us through this. Both our connections to each other as humans, as loved ones, and our connections as part of our democracy. And that this is a moment when it could not be more important, both for 2020 and for every single one of us, to really invest in our democracy and really take an ownership of this race and this campaign. And we believe that, even though we are not looking at knocking on doors or hosting big rallies like we normally would over the course of this summer, that's why we've got an incredible network of community captains, precinct captains, volunteers across the state, who are organizing phone banks on Zoom just like this. If you know how to log on to this, you're already halfway there. You can join us on a Zoom. Those of you who might have a little more time, you think, maybe I could dedicate, 2 hours on Monday nights to joining Ed, to fighting to reelect Ed. We'd love to talk to you about becoming a precinct captain. What we've done here is, in addition to the relational work that we're doing, we're also doing a really, really cool, really innovative, sort of both very innovative and very back to basics approach to voter persuasion. And rather than, I think on a lot of campaigns, you may have joined, like I live here in Somerville, so I would join Team Somerville. I would be one of dozens of volunteers in Somerville, making calls to thousands of folks across Somerville. I would, likely, I really care about re-electing Ed. I'm going to join the Somerville Thursday night phone bank, and I'll do that pretty much every Thursday because I know that this election really matters. And I'll probably call 1,000 random people all over Somerville. I would call them each once. What we're doing, and that goes back to, like I said, Ed's real commitment to investing in our communities and investing in building these connections and these bonds between us during this incredibly difficult time. What we're doing is we're going to narrow it down to the precinct that I live in here in Somerville. So rather than calling 1,000 or 1,500 people once, I'm going to get a list of, the best voters in my neighborhood, and I'm going to give them a call. And we know when it comes to persuasion, sometimes that first call with a voter who's undecided, it's the start of a process for them. It's the start of a conversation. So they'll start thinking about it. They'll think more about Ed because one of our volunteers called them. But when that person says, hey, I live over on Central Street, and I'm your neighbor here. I'm here to talk to you about why this matters. And then instead of calling 1,000 numbers or 1,200 numbers once, instead I get a list that's for my precinct. And so I get to call 300 voters 3 times over the course of the summer. And so I can go back to that voter who was undecided last time and say, hey, I know it's been a few weeks since we talked. Maybe it's been a month since we talked, but Ed's done some really cool stuff that, has made me just so proud to have him as senator. I wanted to update you on a couple of things that he's done recently and, see if you had any questions after our last talk. That's going to be an incredibly powerful conversation for that voter in a really effective way of not just getting them to think about supporting Ed, but to take that step and commit to joining us and re-electing Ed. So you can, on the relational side, you can definitely please sign the Mass Peace Action supporter page that Cole dropped into the comments. You can make your own supporter page and share it with your friends, your family. And then if you want to volunteer, I put that into the comments as well, edmarkey.com/volunteer. You can tell us different ways you want to get involved. Or if you want to check out the different events that we have hosted locally to you, you can do that at edmarkey.com/events. And whether you're interested in just signing up for one phone bank, if you want to become a repeat customer and join us as a weekly phone banker, we'll assign you to your precinct. We'll give you ownership over that. On September 1st, you'll know that single precinct, you delivered that precinct for Ed Markey, and that's how we won.
So let me just jump in. Ed is still on.
Yeah.
He wants to say a final word before because feeling bad that he didn't get to his next event yet. And then just to say that we have 8 people signed up so far on our sign up page. So I'd like some more people to sign up, please, while we're still here. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, I wanted to say to our own folks to remember that this is a nationally significant election. It's one of the most significant elections in the nation, right? To lose Ed Markey in the Senate, the actual leader on nuclear disarmament, Green New Deal, you're talking about, a major setback for the progressive movement, a major setback for the nation. We in Peace Action are a constituency that's particularly aware of his importance. So yes, we have to get out there, make sure we all vote on September 1st and get our friends and relatives out there. And also don't forget, we don't have to wait for the campaign to contact us. All of us have our own networks out there. We can just get them mobilized about the importance of this election. It's not that these tools aren't useful, but many of us, we're already connected in our communities, our precincts, and we should just mobilize our existing networks and, not wait, get started right away.
Great, thank you. So we'll just stay on for another couple of minutes. If anyone would like to go ahead and fill out the sign-up form, and then we'll end. We will follow up this meeting with an email with the video of Ed's answers to the questions, and also with the video that we showed at the beginning, which I think there were a couple of transmission problems, got a couple of complaints. So you might want to watch that again.